Leather dye is a pigment suspended in a liquid or oil carrier used to apply and permanently alter the color of leather material. It is commonly available in alcohol or water-based carriers and also available in a variety of colors. Costs generally range from around $3 to $15 per bottle, and leather dye can be used on most leathers and most project types. When compared to paints, which comprise a layer of color added to the top, leather dyes actually seep into the fibers and change the color throughout the material. The types of carrier agent and pigment that are used can lead to very different end results. So we're going to take a look at 4 of the most popular types of leather dyes and give you a look at exactly what they are, what that end result is, and which may help you on your next project. The first we're going to look at is our Fiebing's tried and true black leather dye. This is a really popular type. It's been around for a long time, and if you're looking for a leather dye, chances are you're going to come across or have used this. And this one is an alcohol-based dye, and it has a powdered pigment. So there's the carrier and there's the pigment. And essentially the carrier's function is to help bring the dye into the leather. And then the pigment is going to help color that leather and keep it that color as long as possible over time. So depending on what type of carrier is used, and depending on what type of pigment is used, you're going to get different results. So for example, this is an alcohol based with a powdered pigment. Next up, in a moment, we're going to look at alcohol based with an oil pigment. And then we're going to look at water based. So there's basically 2 main carriers. It's going to be water and alcohol. And then there's going to be 2 types of pigments. They're going to be oil and powder. And when you mix up those 2, you're going to get your variations of leather dyes. So this one specifically, the Fiebing's, again, is an alcohol based with a powdered pigment, and it has a composition that is around 10% water, around 60% ethanol, around 10% oleic acid, and around 2% of a powdered pigment. This formula is generally going to yield a little bit of a drier, more stiff leather and have a little bit of a rub-off compared to some oil pigments. And this may have a little bit more muted color. And here's how it comes out. So we've got this dye, and then here is the result. So it has pretty good coverage, looks nice, and that's our Fiebing's leather dye. Next up, we have another Fiebing's dye. This is the Pro Dye. So a key differentiator is that this is alcohol based with an oil pigment, whereas the one we had just seen previously, the regular dye, has a powder pigment. This one has an oil. And you guessed it, oil is going to be a little more sticky compared to powder, especially when the carrier is dry and things like that. It's not chemically as simple as that, but practically speaking, it's an easy way to put it. And so with this, we have an alcohol base and an oil pigment. There is around 0% water in here, around 50% alcohol, 25% ethanol, and around 10% of a pigmented oleic acid. And that's the oil pigment. And oleic acid is actually a large component of olive oil, and it's also found in neatsfoot oil. So this formula generally yields a more flexible leather with less rub-off and a more vibrant color. And the result is right here. Let's check that out a little more closely. You see you have a pretty nice, rich, even coating to it. So now let's compare this with the first one. So here, we're going to have our Fiebing's regular, and here is going to be our Fiebing's Pro. When we look, these are our results. So this is the powdered pigment, and this is going to be your oil pigment. So if we look here, this has a little bit of a more even consistency, maybe a little bit darker, a little richer, due to that oil pigment. And let's look at them close up here. Again, here on the right is the oil pigment. Here on the left is the powder pigment. So you get a little bit of a difference on that surface look and overall feel to it. The oil one almost looks a little bit smoother. Next up is our Tandy Eco-Flo. So this one has an alcohol base, also with an oil pigment. So So this is going to be closest in performance to the Pro Dye from Fiebing's, although this is the Eco-Flo from Tandy, so it may have a little bit of a different mixture to it. And here's that result. So now let's compare this close up to our Fiebing's Pro Dye that's also alcohol with an oil pigment. So on the left is the Fiebing's Pro, and on the right is the Tandy Eco-Flo. So definitely seeing a difference in kind of richness of color, evenness of application. So there is some variation there. On the left is our Fiebing's Pro with the oil pigment, and on the right is the Tandy Eco-Flo with the oil pigment. All right, and here is our fourth one. We have a water-based leather dye. This is the Tandy Eco-Flo, and it's got the powder pigment in a water base. So it's approximately 90% water, 5% ethanol. And there's some variability in there to make up for that last 5%. So this one is going to be interesting because it has that water base as the carrier and that powder pigment. So let's see what that result is. So now let's compare the four of them. So you get an idea right next to each other, apples to apples, oranges to oranges, whatever fruit you may enjoy the most, we'll see them together. So here are the four. And it's really interesting because they're all black intentionally. So we're looking at, blacks versus blacks. That way there's reduced variability and we can kind of see what's coming out of what. So we could see even here, there's four very different results. So right here is our Fiebing's leather dye. And this is going to be our alcohol base with the powder pigment. Here's our Fiebing's Pro, alcohol base with an oil pigment. Here we have our Eco-Flo oil. That's going to be a alcohol base with an oil pigment. And then here is our Eco-Flo water-based. So it's water-based with a powdered pigment. So it's really interesting. It seems that we're getting pretty dark results from the water-based and from the Fiebing's Pro Dye. That's the alcohol with the oil pigment. So looking at the two Fiebing's, which are probably going to be some of the most popular analyzed ones, we've got that. This is going to be our powder. This is going to be the oil. You can see the differences there. And then when we look at our Eco-Flo's, we're going to have our oil and our water with the powdered pigment. So really interesting. So pretty fascinating to see how these turn out. And you've got four different black dyes, and as you can clearly see, four different end results. So it's really going to depend on the look that you're going for, your personal preference for materials. And also keep in mind, most of these you're going to want to use in a well-ventilated area, possibly outdoors if you can, because of what is in them. That said, there is one of them, the water-based dye from Tandy, that since it is water-based, we can do relatively easily indoors. So let's walk through an example of that so you could see applying the dye in action and the difference between how it may look when you first apply it to when it's done. So we'll take our Tandy dye here. We're going to get a sample piece of leather, and then I'll put it down on this piece of aluminum foil just to prevent any rub off onto our work surface. To apply it, we're going to use a basic wool dauber, which is going to be good and helpful for applying. You could certainly use other application tools as well. And so we'll slide this over here, open up our leather dye, and then we'll just dip our dauber in. You can see the dye getting on there. And then we'll just come over here to our sample and apply it on there. And depending on what you're doing, it goes on relatively easily, pretty quickly. You can see it's already looking pretty good, just literally seconds after applying it. So we'll come over here, cap our bottle back up. We don't want dye getting everywhere. And I definitely recommend, if you are dyeing your leather materials or any other projects, to make sure you put things down to cover your workspace, because the dye very easily gets everywhere and It's going to be easier to clean up something that's intended to get dirty than if you are messing up your workspace. So highly recommend that. Even if you've got gloves, consider that as well, because you'll probably get it on your fingers as I did and just rubbed off. Anyway, here is our sample. And it was that easy. And within a few seconds, it's already looking dry. So let's take a look at this. A little close up. That's the result from the Tandy water-based dye just moments after applying it. So if we look at the dried version, it's already pretty close. And clearly, I need to apply that more consistently here. But the goal of this is just to show you how easy it is to apply. So just make sure you do that evenly and consistently. And it's already looking like it will when it's dry. It'll obviously take a little bit of time to dry, but from the start, it gives pretty good results. So I was really impressed with the water-based dye. I had expected it to be a lot more muted in color and like not nearly as rich. So if you're looking for something that doesn't have a lot, of the intense ingredients that other dyes may have, the water dye may actually be pretty good. So if you are ambitious and looking to dye leather yourself versus getting something already dyed from a tannery, then here are some of the great options that are out there and also some of the more popular options that are out there. So hopefully this helps you understand a little more about what is in them and the benefits that you may get depending on the choice that you make. If you have any questions, let us know. And if you've used these or others or have suggestions or experiences to share, would love to hear them. And there you have it. Until next time.